All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth and final Levin College masterclass session. It's wonderful to be with you this morning. I am Professor Nisha Mistry. I serve as an assistant professor of practice for the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs within the Levin College of Public Affairs and Education here in Cleveland. As I said, we are very happy to be hosting what is now the final session in this series. And the series is basically a set of discussions in which experts share their skills and perspectives through career-focused conversations meant to encourage the professional success, not only of current students, but also of folks in the alumni network and broader community, and also friends and advocates. So after the session is concluded, you'll be able to view a recording. The recordings from the first three sessions of the masterclass series are on the university website. And again, those features discussions on servant leadership, and making data-driven decisions. So if you missed those sessions, you can still catch a recording. Well, today I am so happy to be joined here by Gillian Prater-Lee, a housing justice community organizer at NEOCH. And Gillian's pronouns are they, them. They graduated from Case Western Reserve University with a bachelor's degree in political science and completed their master's degree in 2022 at Pennsylvania State University's Department of Geography. We also have from NEOCH, Josiah Quarles, who is NEOCH's Director of Organizing and Advocacy. Josiah's pronouns are he, him. And Josiah has a strong background in grassroots organizing, public speaking, education, as well as sports-based youth development and multimedia arts. So I just want to extend a very warm Levin welcome to Gillian and Josiah. Thank you so much for being generous with your time. And don't forget, folks, those of you who are joining us, please hold on to your questions and comments. We would love to hear from you throughout the program. And with that, I will pass it along to Gillian. Thanks so much to everyone.
Hi, y'all. Thanks for joining us. Me and Josiah are just going to talk pretty casually about what we do at NEOCH, kind of who NEOCH is, what community organizing is, and kind of some recent organizing campaigns that we've been up to. So we're going to be talking about organizing and advocacy for housing justice at the Northeast Ohio Coalition for the Homeless. My name is Gillian Prater-Lee. Like Nisha said, I'm a housing justice community organizer at NEOCH. Been here for about 3 months, pretty new to doing community organizing as a job. But I've done, different kinds of community organizing in the past in Cleveland and elsewhere. And I just finished my master's degree at Penn State studying human geography with a focus on studying, I guess, the affordable housing system and nonprofits generally, and kind of the challenges to community organizing and advocacy around housing justice through nonprofit organizations. So, yeah, Josiah, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Josiah Quarles. I am now the Director of Organizing Advocacy at Northeast Ohio Coalition for the Homeless, and organizing that really seeks to address the root causes of homelessness through education, through street outreach, through organizing, as well as through advocacy. So the last two pieces are kind of my purview. But all of those activities, as far as organizing and advocacy, are informed by what we learn from interacting with folks through our street outreach, right? And our advocacy is informed then by what we learn from our organizing. We have a model of accompaniment. So it's very person-centered, and meeting people where they are and walking with them, and not trying to organize on top of folks. That's kind of where we're coming from. Lots of love. And as Gillian kind of expressed, we are a more casual setting than most places, which is one of the reasons why I love working there. I have a pretty extensive history in grassroots organizing, unpaid. So it was really awesome when I was able to like come into this space, and I'm like, oh wow, I get to get paid for all of this things that I've just been doing in my spare time after working a full day. So I'm very blessed and happy to be here and share our experience and what we've learned.
Josiah talked a little bit about this, but who is the Northeast Ohio Coalition for the Homeless? NEOC's existence, it existed here in Northeast Ohio since 1988. And we try and break the cycle of homelessness in Northeast Ohio through working to eliminate the root causes of homelessness. So things like economic inequality, racial inequality, segregation, all these sorts of things kind of cause people to become homeless. These are like the root causes of homelessness, while loving our diverse community through organizing, advocacy, education, and street outreach, like Josiah said. So what is organizing and advocacy? What is it that me and Josiah spend all of our time doing?
Yeah, so like advocacy is raising awareness around specific issues and supporting the adoption of policies and legislations that will benefit marginalized groups, right? So when you think of advocacy, you think of like, talking specifically to policymakers, to elected officials. It's more along the lines of lobbying. You're talking to other experts in the field, trying to get, talking points in line so that you're all moving in the right direction, right? But it's much more of a kind of professionalized space. Organizing brings groups of people together to build power directly to challenge systems and institutions. So it's if you want to think about it, a lot of times people will say inside outside game, right? So like the advocacy is kind of the inside game and the organizing is the outside game, right? So it's outside of the established systems and institutions and dealing with people on the streets, in their neighborhoods, in their communities, talking to them, getting to know what their issues are, and finding alignment and building power. We also, as was mentioned earlier, have extensive education and street outreach programs. So we do education programs for service providers, and we do a lot of street outreach directly to folks who are living on the street. We even have a what's called a by name list. So we know folks, our street outreach workers meet every week, and they go through the by name list of everyone we know by name who's living on the streets and what their situations are, or what the progress has been. So those are kind of the three core things that we're doing. In addition to education, this is kind of goes into the education pot, I feel like.
Yeah, education on organizing. Cool. Let me see what the next slide is. Oh yeah. Okay. So this one is kind of just like for folks who don't have a background in community organizing, just like what does community organizing look like? What does an organizing campaign look like? So this is kind of like a process that we go through and how we approach, building power to challenge these systems. So like I just said, building power to challenge these systems, that's not really like a really tangible thing. How do you actually do that? So what you want to do is like identify a specific issue that you can bring a kind of grassroots group of people together to address. So something specific that you can tell when you've won that. You can't just say, oh, we're going to fix all of racism. We're going to fix redlining and all the historical patterns of segregation in Cleveland, which we know are still so apparent. You pick a kind of more specific issue to address. So you identify that issue, and then you build a grassroots community base of people impacted by that issue. who have a stake, right, in addressing it. You kind of determine a specific goal of your campaign. This is what we want to win. This is how we know that we've changed this, right? So whether that's like, I don't know, getting a resident-owned community at Euclid Beach, which is something we'll talk about a little later, or getting a youth drop-in center for unhoused folks in a community, for unhoused youth on the West Side. You'll have a really specific goal of your campaign. Then you identify the targets of the campaign, who has the power to make that happen, who are the people in government, in nonprofits, in community development corporations, whoever it is, who has the power to make that actually happen. And then you figure out, you do a power analysis, you figure out what is needed to make them change their mind and to have it be in their interest, to be on your side on that issue. And then you take action with your grassroots base to move that target from this position to this position. So these pictures on the right, and most of the pictures I put in this slideshow, are from our campaign over at the Euclid Beach mobile home community, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Yeah, I don't know if we need to really look at this slide, but it talks maybe a little more about what housing justice organizing looks like. You want to talk about that, Josiah?
Yeah, sure. And so like as Gillian kind of mentioned, when you begin thinking about like a topic to rally people around, a lot of times it'll be a big general thing. So like housing justice, right? That's a really big general thing. And we want to be able to put very specific issues within the context of larger issues. And so there's a lot of different processes that we use within housing justice organizing. That's not a specific campaign. There are specific campaigns that all are within kind of the overarching umbrella of housing justice organizing, where you get to a constituency, you share these ideas. You want to build power, you want to ignite public support, you want to create a political will to get to the root of what the issue is that you're trying to address. And you want to make sure that it is centered within the people who are impacted, right? So whether that's tenants who are being evicted, or whether that's people who are holding a voucher and they don't have any place to go with it because of source of income discrimination, or our homeless Congress, which is pushing like the homeless Bill of Rights, right? So you want to make sure that all of your actions are really informed by the communities that are most affected by the things that you are trying to address. And you go about organizing that within the context of kind of a larger vision and mission. And each of those actions and kind of tactics are tied to kind of specific campaigns and specific measurables to know that you're making some kind of progress, and you're not just kind of spinning your wheels. And I'll just leave it at that. And that's also actually an awesome picture. We bought that little trailer as kind of a prop to raise awareness. We bought the trailer, painted it. Gillian and some interns and volunteers painted it, and we used it during a demonstration about a week ago.
Exactly a week ago. Yeah, so I figured we could just use the rest of the time to talk a little bit about some recent organizing and advocacy campaigns that we have been working on at NEOCH. So I can talk about the United Residents of Euclid Beach, which is kind of the one campaign I spend most of my time on. So the United Residents of Euclid Beach are a tenants union that was formed last summer at the Euclid Beach mobile home community. which is a mobile home community in Collinwood, so on the east side of Cleveland, still in Cleveland. The land that their mobile homes are on, their mobile home park, was bought by the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, the WRLC, which is a land conservation nonprofit. And they formed the Land Conservancy, along with many community partners, went through this neighborhood planning process to kind of imagine what kind of the future of this mobile home park would be, and this stretch of Lakeshore Boulevard. And so the mobile home park, I wish I had a diagram, but the mobile home park is kind of butts up against the shores of Lake Erie, and on either side of it are two public parks. So in February of this year, the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, along with its community partners, announced that they would wipe or remove residents from their homes in next September to create kind of one unified public park along the waterfront in Collinwood. So obviously the residents at Euclid Beach are pretty mad. Many of them are older or on fixed incomes, and kind of planned on living the rest of their lives in this community, have lived there for decades in many cases, are homeowners. Really cool thing about mobile homes is it's a way that lower income people can actually own their own home. And that's a source of pride for many people in that community. So hearing from the Western Reserve Land Conservancy in February that their plan was to remove this mobile home park has really been just heartbreaking for a lot of folks. So we've been working with this tenants union to try and get the Western Reserve Land Conservancy to negotiate with them to let residents stay, to maybe let residents stay in a reduced footprint mobile home park, to kind of come up with some sort of compromise, or even create a resident-owned community whereby residents would collectively own the mobile home park and kind of govern and run the park themselves. So yeah, that's where that picture of that trailer came from, was a demonstration at the Land Conservancy last week, where we wrapped up a petition campaign asking that the Land Conservancy explore alternative options for the future of the mobile home park and negotiate collectively with the United Residents of Euclid Beach.
Yeah, and so I mentioned a little bit earlier as far as eviction. So right to counsel was an ordinance passed a couple of years, about 2 years ago in the city of Cleveland. So we've been doing a lot of canvassing. We get like court dockets of who's up for eviction, and we try to reach out to as many people as we can in some targeted areas that have high eviction rates but low attendance to housing court rates, and try to inform them, let them know. Some people may not even know that they're being evicted, right? Also not know that there is the possibility of getting free representation, which really levels the playing field. Basically, if you go into housing court without a lawyer, there's an 80% chance that the judge will rule in the landlord's favor. If you have a lawyer, there's an 80% chance that they rule in your favor. So it's a big game changer. It's a narrow scope of people who can actually access that right now, but we hope to expand that, and through our conversations understand like the areas where it should expand, and that goes into like the advocacy. Pay to stay was also a recent ordinance passed, and we did a lot of like organizing around that. In Ohio, if you're a dollar short or a day late, a landlord can start the eviction process. And there would be no nothing to compel that landlord to take that dollar, say, a week later, right? With pay to stay, if you are able to, pay your back rent and any legal late fees, as well as court costs, then the landlord would be compelled to accept that, and that person would be allowed to stay. And we know evictions are the number one entry point into homelessness, and a really destabilizing factor for communities. And the last thing is fair change housing. So like right now, Reentry Week is coming up. We're helping to organize People's Reentry Assembly, which will help people like learn how to tell their stories in a variety of ways that can illuminate some of the issues and the barriers for folks returning who have been involved in the legal criminal system, so that they're able to attain, housing, which is, our focus, but other things as well. Currently, there are things called collateral sanctions that stay with you after you return to community, and make it very prohibitive for people to actually have a functioning life and actually encourage recidivism, which is obviously a disrupting force in community. So there's a couple, there's more than that, but we need to get moving. I'm sure folks have questions, so we'll wrap up there.
And then I just have one more slide, which was ways you can get involved with NEOCH. If you want to know kind of what's going on with us, best ways to sign up for our newsletter and follow us on social media and see kind of what's coming up. We do have a volunteer program with our outreach workers on Friday nights called the Love More Project, where volunteers cook food and bring it around to serve to many of the unsheltered homeless folks in Cleveland that we work with. One that I always want to plug is to intern at NEOCH, mostly because that's how I first got involved in NEOCH. I actually interned here in 2018. And it's just a really great place, if you are in school, to kind of bring some of the things you're learning about in your coursework actually out into the real world and kind of work towards making change. And then we've mentioned a couple of times, have these different trainings and workshops as part of our education series that are really informative and interesting.
All right. Well, thanks to the NEOCH team, Gillian and Josiah. That is incredibly valuable sort of street level insight and expertise you're bringing to our community. So thank you so much. And we will move now into a Q&A and discussion. And I don't think this conversation could be any more timely. The extent of the homelessness crisis in the United States is really deeply troubling. I think we all agree, excuse me, that is unacceptable. In fact, according to HUD, based on data from a year ago, over 500,000 Americans, right, were experiencing homelessness on a given night. And that's January 2022 data. And so we know that even before the pandemic, due to structural inequalities of all kinds, including decades of wage stagnation, loss of family wage jobs, so many factors, and along race and color lines, of course, that these impacts are very widely felt, and we have seen significant increases, right, in homelessness. So the value of organizing, of directing funds to where they need to go, aligning partnerships, outreach, all of that is so critical. So of course, we have to look at sort of where we are, right? Cleveland, the context here, though, is very particular. So it's been an ongoing problem for decades, and I know you both have witnessed, through your work with NEOCH, what's going on. So what does the homelessness situation currently look like? And how would you sort of compare it to, say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Where do we stand today in Cleveland on this issue?
Well, I would first say like those HUD numbers, just to give perspective, those HUD numbers are based upon what's called a point in time count, which means that like one day out of the year, agencies basically count people who are in shelter, and then outreach organizations go out in the community and count as many people as they can find who are homeless.
Sure, yes.
And that takes place in the middle of winter. And so I just want to raise that like those numbers are like just a fraction of reality. Most folks, especially in, you know, Midwestern or Northeastern states, like in the winter, people are not, they're not just hanging out in the street. They're in abandoned buildings. They're not easily found. And so I would just, you know, note that that entire process really is undermines the severity of the issue. And when you look at, say, California or places like that, that are more, have warmer climates, you see the numbers are staggering because they're much more easily countable, right? Because people are not hidden away in abandoned buildings and things like that. And that also actually affects the funding to deal with the issues. So we receive, and you know, northern states receive far less funding because we only have one day, and it's the middle of the winter, and that's how federal funds are allocated. So that's one thing. But we've seen that like during COVID, we were able to bring numbers way down. We were able to decongregate people with federal funds and put them in places where they could stabilize, where they had some privacy, where when resources were brought to them, they had time to process and really like integrate into that process and get housed, like get some stability. But those, you know, that kind of programmatic thought and funding, you know, dissipated. So now we're seeing that climb back up to where we had been. And I'd say like what's really troubling now is I think there's because of the general affordable housing crisis, as well as factors like these large equity trusts and investors that buy up huge swaths of housing and are not compelled to do any repairs or are not subject to inspections. I have encountered multiple people who are being evicted from buildings that are already condemned. Like the city condemned the building, but because there's no point of sale inspection, that building was able to be transferred because the investor was paying cash. Now, if you want to buy it with like bank financing, the bank's going to want to see something, right? But if you're an investor and you have cash on hand, you can just buy buildings sight unseen, nobody looks at it, whatever, not register it as a rental property, and then rent it out to people with no lease, and they're paying cash, and people are living in condemned buildings and then being, so that honestly is, they're homeless, right? These buildings are should be uninhabitable. And so what I think that is, that's an area where I think we are in a way worse place than we were 10 years ago.
And as a follow-up, Josiah, would you like to see the city and state do more by way of responding to the kind of predatory real estate patterns that you're seeing?
Absolutely, on the state level, on the municipal level, on every level, right?
Sure.
Yeah, there's the auditor's office at the state level could do a lot, like requiring people making purchases in the state to register and disclose, because for the most part they're hiding behind LLCs which are limited liability corporations. They're called that for a reason. They have limited liability. So an individual is, masked with that LLC, and say, municipalities can levy fines against that LLC. But all they would do is just shut down that LLC, declare bankruptcy, open up another LLC, buy the property again, and no problem is solved, right? However, you have someone like an individual who is living and experiencing poverty and struggling to maintain their home. They can actually be criminalized by those same codes and sent to jail, and we've seen that locally. So there's a lot of work to do on the front end to put people first, right? And not private equity.
Sure. Definitely a huge area to keep an eye on this year and going forward. So in your presentation, you touched on the homelessness Congress that NEOCH organizes. Can you tell us a bit more about how that got started and the role of the Homelessness Congress in developing these various strategies to combat homelessness in this region?
So I was not here when it first got started. I came on board shortly after, so I can't speak 100% to that process. I was in conversations with NEOCH from other organizing activities, and was like hoping to get involved with that. And then like the pandemic hit, and that kind of whole thing shut down. But the idea is that we host two community homeless Congress meetings, a month, right? One on the east side, one on the west side. One is at a church, and one is at kind of a service center. It's called Bishop Cosgrove. And there are places where meals are served regularly, where folks are very familiar. And so they know where it is, they feel welcome there. They often just attend to grab a meal, whatever. And we hold like 1 hour informational sessions, as well as like learning, what's going on the street, like what are the issues that they're facing. One of the things that really rose like source of income protections on our radar to the level that it is because, there was a rapid rehousing program, which is basically like, if you are, you become unhoused, you can be eligible to be rapidly rehoused through a program at like Eden, and you have like basically a year to stabilize, and they will fund that year of housing, right? But unfortunately, there were hundreds of people with these rapid rehousing vouchers, and there was nowhere for them to go because places would not accept the voucher, right? So that informs like what are the needs, public restrooms, right? Like huge need, right? The criminalization of people on transit, right? People want to spend their days somewhere warm, and will ride the trains. And there was, the transit police were like ticketing and arresting people. And so there was I was involved in an entire campaign to get that to stop. And the Groves decision actually ended up stopping that. But like those spaces are ripe with like understanding of lived experience. And even in our trainings to other agency folks, the idea that the people are choosing to live on the street because they've been traumatized by shelter. Like they've been traumatized by these systems. And it's like, we have to do a better job of not doing that in order for them to at least get into a space where they can like safely receive, services and be connected with housing, with their medical needs, with mental health and things like that. But if they're so traumatized they can't return to that space, then they're not going to be able to receive that. You look at like from the trans perspective and what their experiences are in trying to go to one place or another place and constantly not feel safe. A real need was manifested in the community through conversations at Homeless Congress. So it's really important to just consistently be grounded in what people are going through every day. And we have a kind of an escalator of an engagement and a leaders group that meets as well, so that folks who, have stabilized in a way can take on additional, responsibilities, and be engaged at a higher level than others if they would choose to. So it's really a powerful program, and yeah, the leaders meet like twice a month and have been instrumental in putting together the Homeless Bill of Rights, which we're hoping to push through City Council.
Well, Josiah, so much of what you're speaking to, as I'm hearing it, has to do with sort of elevating the human voice, right, and the human face really behind the day-to-day of this housing issue. We pretty much all accept that housing is sort of basic, whether the extent to which you believe it's a human right or not is, depends on who you are, but it's very core to our well-being. And I'm just curious for both of you, Gillian and Josiah, given the population that you serve, folks who have already, in so many ways, more than just housing, have been in one way or another on the margins, right? What kinds of skills do you think someone should bring to, say, an organizing role or a public service role in this type of area to really be attuned to that lived experience and to really, in the fullest way, serve the community? What kind of skills are really critical in your mind so that one's prepared to work in the field?
I can answer first. Yeah, so I did my undergrad and studied political science, and then I did a master's, which was like studying economic geography, being very critical of the housing system and these structures and the nonprofit industrial complex and all these sorts of things. But kind of what I feel like the kind of skill set that I missed from that sort of very specific critical education is the sorts of like interpersonal skills. Like I did a master's this past year, or these past 2 years. So I was sitting in a room reading and writing and studying and critiquing for 2 years straight during a pandemic. And to turn from that into like actually trying to address these things, turns out you need to like talk with people and engage with people at a really deep level and build trust and deal with conflict and all these sorts of things that I didn't really have the opportunity to learn in that coursework. So yeah, I think like the interpersonal skills, the conflict resolution skills, being comfortable with kind of ambiguity and tensions in the work and holding those sorts of things. I didn't necessarily see that in my coursework in grad school. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% second what Gillian said, and I come from like a totally different perspective, right? Like, I don't have any, not that I don't have any formal education, but like, I don't have, you know what I'm saying? I don't have degrees to my name. Like I very, very much came from like the opposite perspective of like just doing organizing and like messing up until I figured it out, right? And just pulling from experiences of just, you know, relating to people in a myriad of different jobs and locations. And I rode the bus for the most of my life, right? I think that's really great training for relating to people and de-escalation, and being able to hold conflict. And I think I think it's really important to have an understanding of like how systems work though, and how power works. And I think you have to have like an intense curiosity, because you're always learning something about the specificity of a system or a relationship. And if you just take it at first glance, you're not going to be effective, right? There's a lot of assumptions that people have about things that are not really based in the granular realities. And it's those granular realities that matter the very most to organizing. It's great to have like a overarching kind of strategy, but the granular tactics within that strategy is what makes the win. So that's what I would say. Like, being able to understand like large systems and interactions, but most of the work is not that. It's actually being able to talk to people and keep people engaged, and not despairing, because I think the biggest enemy of organizing is despair and apathy. So that's what I got. I guess being organized too helps, although I'm not the most.
Well, intense curiosity mixed with, an appreciation for granularity, is an excellent starting point. I think those two things you really hit on some really key sort of inner guiding points that really can steer people over the course of their career if they do this work, or frankly, in any line of work, but particularly given the sensitivities and the complexities interpersonally and otherwise that you have to deal with day to day doing this kind of frontline work. I do hope that those in the audience and those listening take that away from this. And also, Gillian, you pointed out, the willingness to embrace ambiguity, to be in those difficult moments, as an educator, but somebody who's a professor of practice, having come to the university from the workforce, I think it's so key to bridge that critical analysis and also the sitting down and having the hard talks kind of learning. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to the audience. I know we have some questions waiting. So I know that Christine McIntosh from the city of Euclid has a question. Christine, would you like to weigh in? Thank you.
I was curious, Euclid's a city that passed pay-to-stay legislation in recent years. And last week, I believe, county council was discussing the topic, and there were some legal challenges presented. So I'm curious how NEOCH is dealing with those discussions, and are you increasing advocacy surrounding the subject? What do you see the future of that being?
So I'll put a plug in for something that we have going on. We hold a monthly convening called CAHA, which is the Cuyahoga Affordable Housing Alliance, in which we, invite, a lot of stakeholders at the city, county level, agency folks, advocates, even just tenants, other organizers, to really they have been generally kind of like informational sessions, right? And the next one will be this coming up Monday, and we're actually focusing on pay to stay, what the implementation process has been, and the application process, right, within the courts locally, and then also confronting what is like a Hydra like problem that was presented by SB 430, which at the state level was really introduced directly to confront municipalities placing rent caps right? So it was basically like landlords saying like, no, you can't cap our rent, right? But because the language is so vague, um, there are folks who are trying to basically apply this to stop any municipal laws that have anything to do with landlords or in tenant relationships, right? So that would include pay to stay, right? That would include source of income. That would include like anything, right? So uh, generally speaking, what really needs to happen is some guardrails need to be placed on that language at the state level. But there are cases that have been coming out from different municipalities where we're seeing pay to stay being applied by judges favorably, right? So there are test cases. And we've actually, unfortunately, had to hold back a little bit of our organizing specifically around it, just because there are certain judges who have been like less less favorable, and we really don't want to establish bad precedent. So that's a conversation that is coming up, and there's a lot of folks who are really engaged in that. It's really a prescient issue. It's really important. The state legislature is a mess. And we really need to be able to protect our communities at a local level. So it's a very important issue, and I'm glad you brought that up.
We are open to other questions from the audience.
If no one else speaks up, I do have a couple other questions.
Please.
I'm curious how NEOC's advocacy and outreach efforts balance the rights of property owners with the rights of tenants and individuals. I think pay to stay, we heard a lot of discussion around that exact question, how you can protect one group while also protecting the rights of another. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Generally speaking, I think when we're talking about like housing justice, we're talking about all forms of housing justice, right? So we're not just speaking about tenant landlord relationships. We're talking about the ability for people to be housed in general, and that extends to like home ownership. Um, and so I think that in addressing any issue, like you have to have an understanding of the breadth of the impact, right? So in say we're talking about source of income, right? So one of the reasons that I found through conversations that a lot of aside from just like stigma, right? A lot of landlords don't want it because they recognize that like there's an additional inspection that they're going to have from this agency provider, right? And that's like legwork, that's time, that's like lost potential rent, right? So they're building in like additional funds, like kind of gap funds during that time, is an important aspect when you're having that conversation. But also, right, to the counterpoint of that, like the additional inspection, it wouldn't be additional if we were actually doing inspections, right? If we were actually doing proactive inspections, and I can't speak to Euclid because I'm not sure what that situation is, but I'm certainly sure in the city of Cleveland that there are no inspections, right? There are no point of sale inspections. There's just no proactive inspections, and there haven't been for like decades. So if you introduce this into the ecosystem, it's like, oh, now this is something else that I have to do. This is like a thing that I have to do that nobody else has to do. Like, I don't want to do this. I'd rather rent to somebody where I don't have to do that, right? But if you raise the bar and say, no, everyone needs to be living in a place that's habitable, like we need to be doing inspections across the board, well, then that landlord doesn't feel penalized by having an inspection because they were going to have an inspection anyway. And then you provide that gap funding. So like thinking about issues like on both sides of the coin is really important to do. So that you're not just completely alienating. As far as like landlords in general, like if you think of it as a job, then cool. If you think of it as just passive income, then we inherently have a philosophical problem. Um, People just making money off of other people for doing absolutely nothing. I don't think that's fair in any way. Um, but if it's a job, if you're engaged and you're maintaining your property and you're in communication with your tenants, and then that's cool. That's a job just like any other job.
Thank you very much. I am proud to say that Euclid does have inspections. Can they be improved? Of course, but we might have a leg up. And I have one more question, but I do want to open up to anyone else who might have questions, so I'm not dominating the conversation.
Sure, let's just ask the rest of the audience if anyone else out there would like to share a comment or question. Now's the time. So I would say, Christine, you're welcome to just go ahead and ask your final question, and then we'll just kind of have some closing remarks. So Christine, go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is kind of a question revolving around that investor activity that was previously mentioned. We know we have a number of people here at the city and that participate in the VAPAC meetings and just, lots of discussions around trends and housing trends. So with those more predatory investor activities, of course, there's some that are good-hearted and treat communities and residents in a fair manner, but all these issues with deferred property maintenance, LLC increases in their LLC purchases of property, discriminatory lending. What can NEOCH do? What can community members do to affect the laws governing those subjects? So if a city's not doing adequate inspections, what can the average resident do, or community member? What can they do to try to affect the change, and how can NEOCH help them?
So I think in terms of holding those sorts of LLCs and out-of-town investors accountable, we've seen, not with NEOCH, but through the Morelands Group, some progress in holding a landlord that was not picking up trash, not maintaining their housing, not communicating with residents in Shaker Square accountable through a tenants union that was formed. I don't know, Josiah, do you know when the Shaker Square?
A couple of years ago, I believe.
Okay.
About 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah, so they've been successful in organizing a tenants union and kind of demanding that this out-of-town investor kind of maintain their properties and kind of respond to residents instead of just sending some property management representative. And there's actually a court case now. Josiah, do you know more about the court case through the city?
I'm not super familiar, but I do know that and they're not that's not the only, I think there's several property owners in that area who are being sued. One by the city of Cleveland, one by the city of Shaker Heights. And so, the effectiveness was really rooted in kind of harassing government officials until they did something, right? So that's one, that's one thing. It's like a simple thing, right? But if you have people who are organized, who understand their situations, and really just be a nuisance to your city council folks, they don't want to constantly hear that complaint. They don't want to see you on the news. They don't want any of that, right? And so that, I think the base structure is like organizing, right? So that we know what's happening, where it's happening, when it's happening, and people are empowered and supported in their efforts. I think there's a lot of different things that can be done on like different municipal levels. Um, Sally Martin, I think is great. Who is now the building and housing director in Cleveland, and did a lot of good things in South Euclid to try to kind of stem the tide of these investors coming in, through tidal clouds and other things that could be enacted municipally. As far as like tracking down people and unmasking LLCs, I think that's really too much work to put on a municipality. I think that needs to be a larger entity to do that. Maybe at the county level, I think would probably be the smallest place where you can actually try to do that effectively. And at the state level, it would really be preferable. I think it's also like a lot about education, right? I was just having a conversation the other day with somebody, and he was talking about somebody he was seeing on Instagram, like, flipping houses and like, I'm getting money and like, this is great, like blah, 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 and it's like, having the conversation that, this kind of like real temporary and very like personal accruing of wealth is like destroying the community around you, because you're flipping these houses to people who've never seen them. They're not doing any upkeep. They have no investment in the community. And if we can like really build an understanding around that and make the acts that rehabbing these houses and bringing them back into the public good and creating like apparatuses for like receivership when we're naming folks who are bad actors within the markets, like, okay, if we can take it away from them, right? If we can do that and put that pressure, it needs to be received by somebody, right? So we have to have like community actually organized to put those properties back into the public good. So I think a lot of community education and understanding the ecosystem and the impact is really necessary. And once that happens, then people, if you know that you're tearing your own stuff up, you might think twice about it. And like, there's another option that can actually employ more people and, make the community actually better, and demand that like there's some funding for programs that can help do exactly that. So, it's a complicated problem, but no, it's a complex problem, but it's not complicated. Be accurate. So I don't know if that answered the question totally, but I hope there were some nuggets in there.
Okay, Christine, was that helpful?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Josiah and Gillian. And I'll just, throw in here that this matter of, out of town investors, and in some cases, we're talking about very, very out of town, as in, New York City out of town, not next door. And, certainly there is a disconnect here in terms of cause and effect, or perceptions of cause and effect in many cases, given that distance from the reality of the community, right? As you describe it. So, okay, well, we are really at time now. So I just want to ask our speakers, if you have any closing remarks, maybe you can reflect a bit on the future, what's around the corner for NEOCH, or anything else that you would like to share with our audience. I'll just leave it to you.
What I would say is, at least for me, to follow what's going on over at Euclid Beach. I know the next couple months are going to be really critical in that campaign to keep 139 households housed in that mobile home park. So that, and then more broadly, it's pretty recently that NEOCH has expanded into housing justice organizing, kind of beyond working with unhoused folks, into organizing renters and residents in all sorts of capacities and campaigns. So it's pretty exciting that we've had this kind of growing team. At least I'm excited to be part of it. So there'll be more to come from NEOCH.
Awesome. Thank you. Josiah, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I'm consider myself revolutionary optimist. So, you know, I always believe in the possible. I believe in people. And if given opportunity and if given community, there's really no limit what we can accomplish. And so I stay encouraged. This is like some really heavy work sometimes, but like, you know, it's really important to like weave in joy and recognize like the love that exists like between folks who are doing it and the connections that are made within the community. And like every little win is important. If it's just like a conversation, right, that turns someone from like despair to hope, like that is like a huge win. And so I stay encouraged with that, and I'm really excited about the possibilities of growing in capacity and leveraging the energy around this issue in communities, you know, around the area. And if folks ever have need to have a conversation, feel free to reach out to us. We go all over the place. We're not just Cleveland. Like we're giving comment and pushing for things in Cleveland Heights and Warrensville and Lakewood, wherever there is a need, where there's a possibility for growth. So I'm so appreciative for this platform and for the work that you do for CSU, and thank everyone for their time and their questions. Yeah, and I'll see you out there in the world.
Thank you. And Josiah, what's the best way to reach you, to reach NEOCH after this program?
Yeah, so I would just our website, NEOCH, NEOCH.org. You can go there, contact us through there. Give our office a call. Tony is awesome. She'll probably answer the phone, get you in touch with whoever you need to reach out to. We're open 5 days a week, 9 to 5. And yeah, that's it. I fully endorse our classes, take our classes, our webinars, and all that stuff.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Josiah Quarles and Gillian Prater-Lee. Thank you so much for being with us. This has been the fourth and final session in the masterclass series. We've been talking about housing justice with NEOCH, and I certainly hope that everyone out there enjoyed the program and took away, many nuggets of expertise and wisdom. Wishing you all the best, and please stay tuned for more programs in the future. Thank you, everyone, and take good care. Goodbye.